Something you've been associated with for many, many years is the Academy Awards.
That is true. The Academy Awards, the Oscars. I've done 20 of them, but I do not hold the record. Actually, I'm way off that record. Yeah, record is probably Michael Seligman and Danette Herman, who did casting for many of them. I work with a number of producers over the years. I gotta say, my favorite is Gil Cates. I've done like 9 of them with Gil, and always a treat to work with him. The Academy Awards itself is an interesting animal. When I started, I used to do the opening numbers. I used to do the original opening numbers, working with people like Donald O'Connor, Charlton Heston, Debbie Reynolds. Did it one year. What a disaster. One year with the 4 hosts were, let's see, Walter Matthau, Richard Pryor, Liza Minnelli, and a 4th non-singer. And I wrote a number called "And It All Comes Down to This." And it all came down to that. And nobody had rehearsed. And, it was just one of those things you want to take back, but you can't. But anyway.
How did it come out on screen? How did it come out on screen when it actually...
Just as I thought. It was Liza carrying the thing because, and the rest of them were terrified of singing. And I did a lovely one called Dancing on the Silver Screen with Donald O'Connor, and kind of reinstituted his career, as a matter of fact. And he was lovely. There again, it was going to be Gene Kelly. And he, at the last, so towards the end, he had said, I don't think I can do it. I did another one with the 50 years. I think it was Debbie Reynolds did 50th anniversary of the Academy Awards. So that's how I started doing just the opening numbers for people like Marty Pacetta, who was directing, and Howard Koch was producing at the time. And so then I started doing some writing too, and then doing mostly writing and less musical things. But I always got the musical categories because of my background. They say, you do the presenters and when we used to meet to decide who was doing what category, if you had a contact with somebody, a presenter, or a knowledge of the category, you would get to write that category. I'm going to have to stop for a moment now. So we would do whatever category you were familiar with, or the ones that nobody wanted, you would end up with, like sound design for a short or something. Anyway, it was always through the different producers, including Jack Haley Jr. and a number of other people. They would always come in and say, oh, we're going to do a whole new Oscar. It's going to be... And I would say, gentlemen, the Oscars is a dinosaur. If you paint it green, you have a green dinosaur. If you paint it red, it's a red dinosaur, but it's a dinosaur because you're so fixed in your situations that you've got awards. You've got like 4 awards that people care about, maybe 5. Actor, actress, supporting actress, and best picture. The rest are kind of filler. You got 3.5 hours, and you got to start off with 1 award. Supporting actor, okay? So we're 20 minutes in, we've done the monologue. We're 20 minutes in, you got the first award. Now you got supporting actress, actor, actress, and picture. By the time you get to supporting actor, you've got to eat up all these categories that nobody cares about, and you've got to keep them entertained and interesting. In addition, at that time, in the early days, the last 3 awards had to be actor, actress, and picture together. You couldn't squeeze director in there or anything else or move one up earlier in the show. So you had 1 award to play with for 3 hours till you got to what people would care about. So over time, I guess they've changed the rules, loosened up a bit, and tried some more approaches. But the fascinating thing about the Oscars is really the things you cannot anticipate and you cannot write, and those are the moments that the people talk about. The only other thing they ever talk about is saying, this was the worst written Oscar we've ever seen. That's a standard. Everybody hates the writing on the Oscars because they have to say something negative, because if they like it, they have nothing. Anybody can say that. So they pick on the writing very often, and sometimes it's legitimate, but sometimes it's just pick on the guy who can hit back. So, like I say, I've done 20 of them. They differ in term, but there is a formula, there is a pattern, there is a degree of interest that is churned up ahead of time like no other show. And you feel the pressure right up until the after party. The hosts vary, the hosts differ. What usually happens is that whoever is the host brings in his or her own staff of people. And rarely do the twain meet. Their writers are over there and the show writers are over here. So we write for the presenters, we write the special events, the special awards, the montages, the setups for that. And basically that's how that works.
Are you privy to what the hosts writers are doing?
It depends. Rarely. They only reveal it. Some hosts reveal it just to the producer. And they will only do it, and some of them will just mumble it at the dress rehearsal the night before. They won't do their actual jokes. They'll do jaffa, 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 boom. And then, so you really don't know. And some hosts believe so much in the reaction of the people who supposedly have a sense of humor that they will, all right, Steve Martin, perfect example. Steve is so secure and is so willing to share that at lunch hour at the rehearsal, and he'll come and gather a bunch of people together. He says, come on, please, would you come in the room here? I want to try out some stuff on it. And he will try out and he will get a judgment as to what works and what doesn't work. And that's, he will stick by that. And he will always say, you got any ideas or whatever? Also, sometimes we will I always sit backstage, stage right next to all the Oscars and the stage manager and where the people come on and come off. And that's the best non-seat in the house because you can see all the reactions and all the things that are going on. And sometimes the host will accept lines from other people, like me, and sometimes they don't even, they just want to meet in solemn conclave with their little staff, and that's all they want to do. So that's how the process works, and it works pretty much that way all the time that I've done it.
Are there writers that you've worked with a lot on the shows? Is there
Hal Cantor. Hal holds the record for, I think he's done 40 of them, something like that. Wonderful, wonderful gentleman. Very spirited. I'm pretty sure he's in his 90s now. And Hal he'll tell you what he thinks, whether you want to hear it or not, and it will be funny. And it'll be caustic sometimes, more often than not. And he will be resentful if you do not like what he's written. Not with me, but I mean, if the producer or the actor or whoever says, I don't think so, he'll say, well, you're wrong. Anyway, Hal is a wonderful companion to be in a room with, and hasn't lost a step. And I love him dearly, and any time I have a chance to work with him on anything, I'll happily do it. The other people some of them are out for their own aggrandizement and hang around with the stars much more than is necessary and to get the job done. And but for the most part, it's an assignment. It's a thankless job that you thank God you got it. I mean, it's a strange amalgam of things because you get privy to things that you'll never see anywhere else. Sitting in dress rehearsal, and you see Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn seeing each other the first time in 12 years, and you're standing right there while it happens. You're there in the backstage when Laurence Olivier gets a special award and makes this speech, and you're standing there and you're saying, this doesn't make any sense. I don't know what he's saying. And Marty Pacetto was the director, and he cut to a picture of John Voight, who was up for Coming Home that year, in the audience with tears streaming down his face, listening to Laurence Olivier, because he's so moved by what he's saying. And Olivier walks off the stage. I happened to be stage left that time, and he walks off, and I'm the only one standing there. And he says to me, oh, God, I sure mucked that up, didn't I? I've no idea what I was saying. And if you go back and listen to the tape, it's nonsense. But he says it with such eloquence that you think, this is profound. I don't understand it, but it must be very profound. It's Lord Olivier. Moments like that are priceless, I have a friend in New York. I went to college with this girl who was a lovely, lovely. She used to do the translations for the Metropolitan Opera. And I used to call her backstage from the Oscars while the show was on. I'd call her in New York. And I'd say, Sonia, guess who's here and wants to talk to you? Sophia Loren. Can you hold the phone a minute? And it was Sophia Loren. And this girl, Sonia, was in charge of the Spoleto Festival in Italy. She speaks fluent Italian and everything. And in the middle of the Oscars, my friend and Sophia are chatting. So there are moments like that that are just, priceless, and memories that are just, they're great,
What about sort of the workaday moments? I mean, when do you start preparing for the show?
It really depends on, the nominations. You wait for the nominations. Then you have to wait for the presenters. And they get the presenters, and they put them up on a board. The board is covered, so people don't know. They want to reveal them one by one to the press, So every time that Danette Herman gets a catch, they ring a bell. There's a big ship's bell there, and they ring it, and they go, yeah. And then they put it up on the board. There are tentatives and wants and A-list, and we got to settle fours and, stuff like that. By the time, I guess, we get our assignments, it's maybe, if everything is going well, it's maybe 3 weeks ahead of time, 3 weeks before the show. And then we have that one meeting where we all pick who we want to write for or who we have an affinity for. And then there's a big production meeting with everybody, and you go all the way around the room, and everybody says how many years they've been doing this and their name and what their function is. And then we start handing in material. Now, when you hand in material, it used to be that the producer would tell the presenter who wrote it. And if you have any questions, call them and tell them. Well, that got a little hairy sometimes. And also what would happen was that you never get to the presenter. It was the manager would call and say, she'd never say that. And I said, how do you know what she'd say? Ask her. I don't have to ask her. Well, I don't have to answer to you. Anyway, it would get that way sometimes. So what would happen towards the end, Gil would approve of everything. It would go into the script. Copies would go out to the presenters or their agents or their managers or their PR people. And then the day before the show, you said, call in if you want, if you have any things that call Gil and tell him you don't like it or you're not comfortable. And then we'll fix it. You get a few calls, but mostly they would wait till the last minute when they thought you couldn't do anything more about it. And then they'd say, he doesn't want to say it. He doesn't feel comfortable doing that. And I said, well, maybe if he knew how to read, he'd be much more comfortable. Anyway, what would happen was we used to have one-on-one dress rehearsal where Gil would call you into the office with the presenter and you would talk it out, and then you'd go and make the change. But he got wise after a while and said, let me talk to the presenter, and if there's a problem, I'll call you in. So that he played the buffer quite often and did it quite well. He like Gil said, he said, this is the only time of the year when everybody answers my phone call. He said that I love that. So it's true. It's a position. The producer is the position of power. And pretty much he gives you an answer. That's the best thing about Gil. Right or wrong, black or white, you got an answer, And you can operate from that answer and know he'll stand behind it. So most of the time, occasionally you'll get a strange thing. There was a well-known director. I had written the copy for Best Director, and he was the presenter with a younger actress, okay? They came in the afternoon of the dress rehearsal, and they showed him the copy, and she said, oh, this is fine, this is nice. And he said, let me go in a room and we'll fix this. And he took this poor child into a room. 3 hours later, they came out. I don't know what they were doing. But the copy was almost the same after 3 hours. And I said, whatever makes you happy, Occasionally you'll get something like that. The moments that really work, like I say, are the moments that you cannot plan on. One of the interesting things you didn't mention Bob Hope, but I did Bob Hope. I did a special or two with Bob, and I did his 90th birthday show. And when he was, a little past 90, and Billy was still hosting the show, Billy Crystal, who was wonderful. And at that particular time, it wasn't going so well. The monologue didn't quite work, and there's a little dragging with those awards. I said, Billy, you know who's in the audience? I said, Bob Hope is in the audience. I saw it. I said, he's done this show more than any other MC. You acknowledge him, you're home free. So he acknowledged Bob. Bob got up, took a bow. Terrific. Just like elevated him. Then he realized that I think Max Sennett or somebody from Silent Movie was there, stood up and started to talk, and there was no mic on him. And Billy played, oh, he's from Silent Movies. Anyway, the whole little thing worked nicely. 3 hours and 20 minutes. The show is over, okay? The Oscars are over. And I usually come out from my little side there and come on stage, and I look for my wife, who they put up somewhere in Jennemsveld. And so I know I'm going to meet you. We'll go to the banquet. And so I'm standing on the edge of the apron of the stage, and people are exiting. They're all going out. And along comes Bob Hope along the front of the stage. And he looks up and he sees me and says, "Buzz, how are you?" I said, "Fine, Bob." He says, and to this day, I don't know if he was kidding or not. He says, "Are you coming back after intermission?" And I said, "No, I don't think so, Bob. I think that's enough." He said, "Oh, no, I don't know if he was making a joke or he really thought another 3.5 hours after this that he's going to come back and watch the rest." Those are moments that are just, they're delicious. I love.
What about some on-camera moments? What are some of?
Well, I was there for the Jack Palance push-ups.
Was that completely unscripted?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. But then we kept feeding him lines. I was there when Johnny Carson had to fill in. Of course, I think Charlton Heston was stuck on the freeway and was supposed to present something. Or there was some sound guy, and they kept saying he's already in, he's on Mulholland, and he's waiting for the light to change. And, they kept throwing him lines. Carson was wonderful, too. He was really a terrific host.
What made him so good?
Well, he had the experience of working a live show, for 30 years. And he knew his audience. He knew he didn't have to be the center of attention. He had his little pods where he would score, and the rest of the time he would just be the compere and leading people in and out with charm. I mean, he was a charming man, I remember once I think I inducted him into the Hall of Fame, and he was there that afternoon, and he came to the rehearsal, and I'm sitting with him, and we're talking, and a lady comes up to sit at a table, and she says, "Oh, Mr. Carson, I'm such a big fan of yours." And without being asked, she sits down at the table, except that she missed the chair and fell on her butt. And Johnny says, "Wait for your laugh." And it smoothed over the situation. But that's, he's ready, he's comfortable, he's at ease, And the man himself, used to get terrible stage fright before every Tonight Show. He used to want to throw up in the wings. I was talking to Michael Jackson once about that, and he was saying, "Buzz, I don't understand it." Johnny says, before he comes out, he feels nauseous. And he says, "What is this? Stage fright, they call it?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Don't you?" He says, "Are you kidding? I live to come out on the stage." He says, "I have trouble the rest of the time when I'm off stage." He says, "When I get out, I can't wait to get out there." But Johnny was always at a party. He was always off in a corner. He didn't want to be there in the first place. Always, very aloof and shy, but a very nice man. I enjoyed the time I spent.
What about Billy Crystal?
Billy, very creative, and also knew his strengths, knew his audience very well, and knew how to reach them without overreaching. Always the problem when you got a comedian hosting the show is, how much time do I do in front? How many spots do I have? And well, Billy knew enough. They gave him, I think, 15 minutes with the opening number and the monologue, and then he'd get to the first award. And that's enough time, really. And some of them say, I can't even say hello in 15 minutes. Well, then you don't belong here. So, but Billy was very good and always managed to top himself. And rumor has it that he may be back. So that would be interesting because he left on a high note, and it would be nice to see him again.
Whoopi Goldberg?
Whoopi. Whoopi she did it a couple of times. She was not, I think they made too much of her. The big thing was with the costume changes and all the things. And, and it was, Bruce Valanche had a couple of jokes for her that some were at her expense, some were, and she was, I don't know if she was as comfortable as Billy, because you do it once. You can't prepare for it. If it's your first time, that's it. And if it's your second time, it's the second time you've ever done it. So there's no precedence. There's no real history of, I'm going to go to the valley and do these jokes and see what's going to work, So I think Whoopi was fine, and I told her that night that she was going to win, and she was real pleased when she won for Ghost, And I've done other shows with Whoopi, and she's always been very cooperative, with me. She'd, if I'd hand her stuff, she would do it, and she wouldn't really question too much. She may be doing Mom's Mabley, I hear, the comedian. So that would be interesting because she has a big affinity for moms, and she'd probably be very good at it.
Chris Rock.
Chris, I think, was a little out of his element. Also, he wasn't arrogant. I think they took away, just by who he is, his strength, which is language, blue, racial stuff, They kind of, either he self-imposed a censorship on himself, or they said, don't go there, don't go there. And I remember telling him, I don't want this on here, but okay.
Can we stop camera?
Yeah, he did. There are certain people who are put up against a standard as a host that you can't match it, and it's unfair. You bring your own skills and your strengths and your baggage, and it's just, if you buy the performer, and if you understand the concept of what the Oscars is, you'll do better than if you come in and try and superimpose the Oscars on the David Letterman show, which is, it's not the David Letterman show. It's the Oscars hosted by David Letterman. And he knew that after the fact. But he was gone for his comfort zone. We'll do stupid pet tricks, and we'll do Oprah, Uma, and, and when it don't work in the first 3 minutes, you get a little panic sweat. And so, but most of the people who are committed to it and really apply themselves and spend the 7-8 weeks preparing material and numbers and a little off the wall things, it's going to pay off. And Billy always put in the time,
And how about, there's so much information that as a writer you have to convey about the awards and what the backstories of those awards are. How much of that are you required to do, and how much of that can you kind of let go a little bit?
You're really not. Well, the only things you have to say is the process, and that you don't have to say that. They do it at the end, with the Price Waterhouse people or whoever's in charge of the accounting. No, there's not much you have to do about the categories, and that's part of the problem because there are too many categories, and there are too many categories that nobody cares about, you know. Even if you're in the pool. I used to run the pool, the time pool. You put in $5, and within 30 seconds of when you think it's going to end, you know. And you could get maybe $100, $150 if you guess, you know, the closest to the time. But, you know, it should never go that long. And yet you can't move these people off their moment, even with, you know, even with the new scientific and technical award night and the new governor's award and Hirschholt award night. You're still going over 3 hours. Well, there's something wrong somewhere, you know. And but everybody wants to be, you know, and you can fault them, but you can't move them, is what happens.
What do you think are the biggest changes that have occurred since you started on the awards?
Probably the use of bringing people on to talk about the actors and the actresses, you know, having other people talk about them, you know, they think they were their idols or they were important in their lives or their careers or somehow. It elongates the category, you know, and perforce you have to cut back on some of the film clips as to why they were nominated. But I thought it was a nice touch for a year or two. I don't know if they do it anymore even, but at the time it seemed like a worthy attempt at trying something different. You know?
What about the integration of current events into the shows?
I was there when some untoward things happened, like Vanessa Redgrave and her anti-Zionist speech. And, if you win, you see, the problem is there's a luncheon every year for all the nominees in every category where they take a nice big picture of 140 people all together on rises at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. You've had a nice lunch. You're sitting at a table with a nominee, and they split them all up. They're not all the actors together. And it's a nice lunch, and the producer gets up there and says, please, whatever you do, don't take out a list of all your friends and relatives and people. 3 people care. 3 million people are bored to tears. You're creative people. Be creative. Say something memorable. Say something heartfelt. Don't come out with a laundry list of names. Well, you can do that backstage. We'll put you on the internet, and you can thank your every cousin and every relative you ever had. Everybody nods in agreement. Comes Oscar night. And I have to thank my agent and my hairdresser and my makeup person who made me look, you know. And that's where the show goes in the toilet. And there are always 2 or 3 memorable speeches, and that's the ones they talk about. And that's, you know, I've done the Tonys, the Emmys, the Grammys, the People's Choice. I've done just about every award show. And it's interesting that the ones who seem to do the best because they're trained are the Tony Award winners, because they're actors and they're on stage live and they're used to doing that. When you realize that most of these people, a lot of them have never been in front of a live audience as themselves to, you know, to make an impression in 45 seconds, knowing the orchestra is going to start playing and this is your moment, and there are so many people that it's really difficult. I've written speeches, acceptance speeches for people at the Oscars. I won't tell you for whom, but they come out so much better when they learn it and prepare it and just say it to the camera. And it sounds like, gee, they actually gave it some thought and they really feel that, you know. So that works out quite nice. I've also gotten in trouble for writing certain things at the Oscars.
Like what?
Turn it off. No.
Okay.
I can't offhand. I can't think of a.
Okay. You mentioned that you also were a writer on the Emmy Awards. Is that very different than the Oscars?
Not well. It's different in that the Emmy Awards make no bones about separating the stars from the grunts. You know, we have a special night called the Craft Awards, and everybody we're gonna throw who nobody knows, we'll throw them there. You know, and they get an award. It's just as big an Emmy as anybody else's, but we don't have to bore the people on camera in the night of the big event with all the actors and stuff. So that's one of the differences. You have more categories, you know, on the Emmys, and growing every year. You have that to deal with. You see, I think the ones who really solved the problem are the Grammys. Because they said, hey, we're not an award show. We're a show. We're a special. And we're going to do 18 presentations of the hottest performers doing their hottest numbers, and we'll give out 8 awards. Well, of course, we have 108 categories, but who cares? You know, who cares who the best Hawaiian group was this year, you know, or the polka king? So they just say, hey, we don't have to do this. We're in charge. We can do what we want. And it was always that they always had the choice of what categories to put on the air, you know. They had all these committees. Every little group had its own committee on the Grammys. And for years, they used to have to say, you got to have a classical act, you got to have a country and western act, you got to have a spoken word performer out there, you know, and then before you know it, you ate up the clock, and a lot of people, you know. And so they said, hey, we're in charge. Let's change the rules. Let's make it just the wildest, noisiest show that we can get with the biggest names, and let them out there and let them go crazy, and then give them an award. You know, and that's what they did. And we'll announce just before the commercial, these awards were given out before time. You know, best liner notes for a children's album. And so I think they solved the problem right there in their own shop. You know, they finally said, this is how it is. When I used to write the Grammys, I had to go, the whole committee, there were like 48 people would sit there with the script, and each one was concerned with his own category. You know, I'd start the reading and say, good evening. Well, does he have to say good evening? Well, I'm from country and west. Can he say howdy? Yes. No, he can't say howdy. He's from the Bronx, you know. So, I mean, that finally they eliminated that 48-member meeting at the first reading, and they had just a few governors sit and go over the script. But that was a nightmare.
To what do you attribute your longevity in writing for these award shows? Why do they keep coming back to you?
They don't know any better. Why? Because, you know, it's like a specialty. If your head hurts, you don't go to a podiatrist. You go to a brain surgeon, you know. There are so few. It's a specialty. Writing award shows is a specialty. And if you've done it, at least they can say, hey, he did it before. I thought he'd be good. You know, I'm not going out on a limb with somebody new. You know, George Slaughter has a remark. We were doing the Steve Lawrence show in New York, It was the last of the variety shows, and George was producing it. And George says, and we're going to do crazy things. He says, we're going to have Lucille Ball come down Broadway on an elephant. We're going to have, and this writer says, hey, you're trying to do something new. And George says, yes. He says, what do you want to do that for? And George has never, he can't remember the writer's name. I have to keep reminding him each time because he has a mental block on it. But he remembers so clearly and so vividly and with such venom. This man says, what do you want to do, something new? And it's the same thing. You can't get blamed if you take somebody who's done it and you say, well, he had an off day, or I thought he was good. Look, you know he was good. He's got 13 Emmys on his mantelpiece. You know, how bad could he be? So they come to you, you know, and think that maybe you'll do it again. The other problem is, and it's a problem because it's not necessarily true, is that they think because you're older that you haven't kept up with what's going on and that you're old-fashioned and you can't know who Lady Gaga is or, you know, or whatever's going on. But if you keep up and you watch television, as I do, and I mean, I know probably more than my kids who are in the business today who don't watch television. They just make it, you know. So, I don't know. Everybody who has reached a certain point in his or her career has a group of people that they like to work with, or they're sure of, or at least sure to any degree that you can be sure that they're not going to hurt you. You know, if they're not going to help you, at least they're not going to hurt you. And if you try something new, and if you try a new person and it doesn't work out, then you've already shot yourself in the foot in addition, you know. So Pierre Cosset used to say, Pierre was a great producer in the fact that he knew who to hire. And Pierre was once up for the Tony Awards, and they had meetings for potential producers. And Pierre went to New York, and he had this meeting with the Tony Committee, and he said, listen, nobody cares about the Tony Awards. He says, it's not about the show. It's about the party afterwards. And I give the best parties in town. Well, he didn't get the job, but still, that was Pierre's approach to, you know, hire the best people, let them do what they do, and I'll make the party afterwards. You know. Well, he made a nice living doing that. So there are other producers who are just so hands-on that they don't let you breathe. They don't let you do what you do, you know, and that's no good either. That's the other extreme. I try when I write to put myself in the, not only the mindset, but the mouth of the person who's going to say the words, you know. And I try and make them a little more intelligent than they really are, or a little more humorous than they have been known to be, without taking them out of their, not even comfort zone, but out of their area of acceptance or knowledge, you know. And it's worked, you know, it's worked for me. Yeah, it's almost 50 years now, you know. So that's what I do, or did.
Okay, I'm going to go through a few more of your credits. There are so many, so, and we've skipped a lot, but I do want to cover a few more. Comic Relief, 1986.
Comic Relief was an interesting project in that it was the baby of a gentleman named Bob Zamuda, who was basically a comedian, an actor, and a writer who, I guess many people know it now, but he used to be the double for Andy Kaufman when he would do Tony Clifton. Samuda would get dressed up in the makeup and do Tony Clifton. But he latched on to this idea of comic relief, and he talked Billy and Whoopi and Robin into hosting it every year. And he was able to attract the gamut of comedians from the real old-timers who could still deliver to the up-and-coming, the Chris Rocks or whoever was the hottest thing at the moment, the Stephen Wrights or whatever was going on. And they would all come and they'd put in a good amount of time selecting the material. I was basically in charge of doing what I used to call the fly in the eye pitch. I did a lot of charity TV shows, St. Jude and World Vision and things like that. And there was always a thing where you do the pitch for the money, and they used to call it the fly in the eye, because they would have a little African baby with a fly in his eye, and he was so hungry and so couldn't even move. The fly just sat there, and that was the heart tugger that got the money delivered. So my job on Comic Relief basically was to do the fly in the eyes. Whoever would do the serious pitches, the straight pitches, not the comedy things. They would sometimes be comics, or they would be, newscasters or people like that, or straight actors and that's what I would write, basically, those. I guess I did 5 or 6 of those. Did an opening number for them once, or a closing number. That was, doesn't matter. Didn't quite work.
Motown 25, Yesterday, Today, and Forever.
Ah, great show. I go back to Motown and Berry Gordy and the whole gang the number of years. In one of those bizarre sets of circumstances, in one of those summers at summer camp, when I used to be the dramatics and music counselor when I was in college or high school, one of the kids, the campers, was a little guy named Richie Aarons. He was never featured in any of my shows because he was minimally talented. But he was the kind of kid who he would ingratiate himself. And to do a fade out, fade in years later, I find out he is the co-manager of the Jackson 5. He now has a law degree, and he's here in town, and I meet him again in Motown, Berry Gordy's office, I guess. And he says, "Hey, remember me?" I said, "Sure I do." And he said, "Look, I want you to, the Jackson, I've been working with them. They're great. Now I want you to work with them. Maybe you do some work, write for them." And I've been doing Carol, I guess, Burnett at the time. So he knew who I was. And I met Michael. And Michael was, I think he was 12 when I first met him. And so I did a couple of things. I did a special for the Jacksons called Going Back to Indiana. And it was a fun special. And ironically, now that I think of it, was the last appearance of Bobby Darin. He made a guest appearance on that show. Bill Cosby was on it. I wrote a number called The Day Basketball Was Saved, with the Jackson 5 played the Dream Team. We made up this Dream Team with Ben Davidson and Bill Russell and a bunch of huge players, and they played the Jackson 5 to save basketball. Anyway, I got to know Michael then, and Michael used to say, "Hey, why don't we write some songs together?" I said, go away, kid, you bother me. Smart, yes? Anyway, at the time, he used to hang around. I used to be around the piano, and he'd hang around the piano. Anyway, we struck up a friendship, you know, a 12-year-old and a grown-up. But we kind of kept in touch, and we did a lot of things when the Jacksons were on tour. I did their very first act with Bill Angelos. We did it together, and when they played the MGM Grand, and the whole family was there, including Rebe. It was Janet's first appearance on stage. Randy and Janet did Sonny and Cher, and Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy. And I had the Jackson 5 doing the high-lows and doing Sing, Sing, Sing. And it was a strange act, but it was terrific. They were wonderful. But all 9 of them, I think it was, LaToya and Rebe and Randy, and all of them were in the act at the MGM Grand. So I established more with Michael then, and then I ended up actually writing some things with him later on, songs and stuff. And
what songs did you do?
well, I wrote the song that I didn't write with him, but that he actually recorded. It was Gone Too Soon, and that was written for another show, and he called me the night that show was on. It was sung by Dionne Warwick on the show, and it was paying tribute to all the people in television who had passed away, variety performers who had passed away. And she sang it as part of this show called Here's Television Entertainment. I think that was 1984. And he called me that night. He said, Buzz, I love that song. Someday I'm going to record. I said, yeah, okay, Michael, thanks a lot. And, you know, Michael he prepares like 30, 40 songs completely mastered and ready to go. And they do 13 of them on an album, you know. So I was there with him on a couple of things. Wrote a couple of songs with him, but that ended up being his tribute to Ryan White, the boy who died of AIDS. And it was on the Dangerous album and sold over, 30 million copies by now, and became a real standard for all kinds of people. I mean, I get a call sometimes, can I have permission to put your lyric on a gravestone, I get a call from a lady one day, says, I want to use the lyric to honor my dear friend who passed away. I want to put it on the back of a magazine. Just print the whole lyric. I said, yeah, sure, fine. I find out the magazine was called Portuguese Water Dog, and her best friend was a dog. And that's what she put on, in honor of. So anyway, it's been used a lot. It was used at Michael's ceremony. Yasher sang it, Gone Too Soon. I've written songs for Jennifer Holliday with Michael. I wrote his tribute to Elizabeth Taylor that he did, Elizabeth, I Love You. I wrote some stuff with Michael for Steven Spielberg when he was going to do a version of Peter Pan. We wrote 3 songs for that together. It was always just such a pleasure to work with him. He was just so creative, even at 12, I mean, you had to stand back and just wonder if, my wife used to say, Michael, tell the truth. What planet are you from? I'm from here. I said, no, come on, Michael, you can tell. I won't tell anybody. But he was like an otherworldly spirit sometimes, and it was just so, and he was so intense about learning. I mean, that was, to me, was one of the most fascinating things about him. He would want to know about everything. You work with Bing Crosby. Tell me about Bing Crosby. What was he like? Did you ever meet Mahalia Jackson? What is she like? Fred Astaire. He used to call, his list of acquaintances. He used to be on the phone for hours with Katharine Hepburn, Gregory Peck used to come to dinner all the time. You know, well, when you call and say, "Hi, it's Michael Jackson," you're going to answer the phone, right? And Marlon Brando used to give him acting lessons, and you know, his circle of acquaintances and his thirst for what went on before he arrived was just delicious. And so many young people have no idea. The day they started was the day the music started, you know. His idol was Walt Disney, and he used to love, and he got so excited one day. He says, "I found her." I said, "Who'd you find, Michael?" He says, "I found a lady." I said, "What lady, Michael?" He says, "There was a lady who used to give Walt Disney massages every day at 5 o'clock out at the studio. And when he'd have his drink, and she'd give him a massage, and she'd hear everything that was going on. She's in a home in right near Disneyland. I'm going out there, I'm going to pump her and find out." And that's how he was. He went out, he talked to this woman for 8 hours and got every story about Walt Disney that she had. He used to, when he would do a video, I introduced him to this guy who would do research for him, a fellow named Paul Surratt, who did research video. He has a company with all the old footage of all the old shows. I introduced him to Paul, and Paul would say, he'd call me and he'd say, "Send me every shot from every movie ever made of a car chase." And Paul would send him 50 hours of car chases. And he'd sit and watch them all. And the next time he did a video, you would see where it came from. That one of he was a sponge. He wanted to know why they were great, what made them great, how they did it, why they became a star. He wanted to know details about everybody. And that was the intensity. Everything that he does comes from that basis of, I want to be the best, and I want to know why they were the best, you know.
Let's stop there, change the tape.
Okay.